Okay, we're going to look at k-means clustering, which is a real common method of doing unsupervised learning. So in this sort of an example, we have a set of data, but we don't have labels for it. So we don't have automatic labels. We can't do supervised learning here, but we often do see patterns in this data, and we want to try to find those patterns in this data here. We're going to look at this article here from the Python Data Science Handbook on in-depth look at k-means clustering. But first I just want to mention what is the k in k-means clustering does. So when we do k-means clustering, we have to select how many clusters we're going to use. So we're going to have 5 clusters, 8 clusters, whatever we want. So the k, that is the k in k-means clustering is. So if we want 5 clusters, we create 5 means, 5 middle points, and then we create clusters around those. If we think we have 8 clusters, so then we do that. So ahead of time, you have to pick how many clusters you want. But although we'll look at, if you don't know, you can just try out lots of different Ks and then try to figure out which one works best. So let's jump down into this in-depth clustering article here. So again, this uses something in scikit-learn, one of our libraries we use for doing the clustering. They're importing some standard libraries. So this is just Python. And again, this is similar to what we often see in our notebooks, and we'll do a notebook with this. So again, with our k-means clusterings, we'll find some cluster centers, and then all the points that are closest to those cluster centers will be in the same clusters. Here. So every point will be in only one cluster, and that will be the closest cluster center we can have. Sometimes these are called centroids out there. So again, we've got to be able to select a number of clusters here, and we're going to look at some two-dimensional data here, but this actually works in any multiple dimensional, as many features as you want here. So this code just generates some random data or some data here in different areas. So again, if you look at this data, you kind of see that the data is grouped into 4 kind of areas here. For us. And so you would think the computer could recognize, a human can recognize there looks like there's 4 clusters here. We can ask the computer to break this into 4 clusters and see how it works for us to do. So again, if we have this X input, we declare a k-means cluster here, and we fit it to our X. So again, here we're only providing X. Remember, in supervised learning, we usually had an X and a Y. The X being the inputs and the Y being the outputs that our model had to learn to predict. Here we just have X, so this is unsupervised. So we just fit the data, the model to the X. And again, ahead of time, we have to specify how many clusters we want for this. Now once we have that, we can predict the labels. We can predict the labels for all the ones at X, and then any new ones that come up, we can tell what cluster they're going to be in for this. So what this does is take this data that's not clustered and try to break it up into clusters, and here it'll then break it up. If we say 4 clusters, it should find these 4 clusters of data hopefully here and set these up. And you can see kind of the shaded areas trying to mark the cluster center for each of the clusters, and then each one is marked as a different color here. So the algorithm did really good at identifying the clusters and moving them. So how does this algorithm work for this? So we have this step here where we're going to guess some cluster centers and repeat this process of assigning points to the nearest cluster center, and then setting the cluster center to the mean of those points for that. So again, this uses something called expectation maximization algorithm kind of idea, which is a general algorithm where we try to match our items to our expectations, and then we try to maximize our results here. We do this. Now, what does that actually mean? What does any of this stuff mean? So what we'll do initially, like this is our clusters here. So here's our data with our clusters, and we're going to say we need 4 random centroids or center locate means. So we'll pick those, and here they're randomly all in the middle here, but they might be randomly spread all over here, but they're just randomly chosen. Doesn't really matter where, so random spots. So now with these 4 random clusters, we assign every data point out here to a cluster. So these data points here are close to this cluster, and they'll be mapped here. These are assigned here, these assigned here, or whatever. And so we assign every data point to a center here. And so we basically cluster them based on these centroids. So that's an E step. And then we're going to move, now we have all these in this cluster, we're going to redefine calculate the center of this cluster. So that's our maximization, our M step. So we're going to look at all these areas, and we're going to calculate the maximum of that and move this centroid into that. So that's what this is showing, that this maximum is moving over here. These items are on this cluster, and then this, so this will move over here. And this will move over here in yellow. So we do a M step where we move things around, and then we recalculate the clusters here. So again, right, initially we didn't have a very good map, but now we have a better map of our clusters here with our new centroids that were just moved. And so we, again, reassign all of our data points to the new cluster centers here. And then we do a new maximization step where we recalculate every value here. We move each of the centers to the new value in this, so everything gets shifted. So initially, often these cluster centers get shifted a lot, but now they get shifted very little. And then we repeat this step over and over until we end up with our cluster centers. So again, going back here, this is kind of what we do. We start with a set of data elements, and we have to say how many clusters we want to use. Then we're going to create k random data items called cluster centroids. These will mark the center of each clusters. And so we're just going to make them random values, random data values in our field. So that's what they're doing here. And again, these are all grouped here, but this will just work fine if these are just randomly placed anywhere on this field here. Now our E step is we're going to assign each data element to its cluster. So let's just say we had a cluster centroid out here. So some of these data elements may be assigned to it, some of these data elements may be assigned here. Okay, or here, if we have this cluster center, some of these elements may be assigned to this cluster, some of them, it's a bit bigger, might be assigned to this cluster here. So again, once we assign every data element in our data set to one of the clusters and say this is all in cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, cluster 4. Now the M step, we move the cluster centroids to the mean location within the data points assigned to it. So again, here's these purple data points here, and so we calculate the average of all the purple data points here, and we move this centroid into that. So this centroid is going to move from here over to here. Similar like with yellow, yellow has these data points and this data point over here. So we calculate the center of all these and move this, and actually that doesn't move much. It basically stays where it's at because again it's being pulled over by this yellow, these yellow things over here. So that doesn't move much. Okay, so everything moves to its new thing, and then we repeat as long as the centroids, until the centroids don't move, and they all moved, we go back up and repeat the E step again. So again, we're going to assign, we have the new centroid locations here, we're going to reassign, go through every data point in our data set and say, oh, all these are blues, all these are greens, all these are yellows, all these are purples. Because everything is closest. Again, we take this point and say, measure all these distances and say it's closest to green. And this one, what it's closest to, it's closest to purple. So every data point out here, we find out which centroid it's closest to and assign it that color or that cluster. Now once we do that, we do our M step again, where we move the cluster centers to the mean location. So that's what we're doing here. So we have these new clusters, and we calculate the average of all the blue locations, and we move the blue centroid to that, and average all the yellow. And here the yellow one's actually moving from here to here over, and the greens and the purple. And we keep doing that. Eventually, these centroids won't move anymore, and they'll be fixed here. So. Okay, so that's our k-means algorithm, how it works. Now this article goes in, actually, we'll just be doing this, where we'll just use this simple code here to create the clusters and fit them. You can actually write your own code, do all this for you, and that's what this does. If you want to take a programming course or whatever, you can actually program this in and find this. But again, in this class, we'll just be using the built-in clustering algorithms for that process. So we're not going to be worrying about that. But if you're interested, you can see how that's done here. Next, we're going to look at how we can analyze these clusters and work on that down here. So here's another example of this here. This is showing data, and they start off we'll wait till it goes. In iteration 1 will start, and it will randomly choose some centroids. They'll choose 3 centroids here marked by these crosses and little black X's here, and then it'll update them and redo which values are assigned to each cluster. And so you can see these clusters slowly shift over to one location, and finally then they're stopped here. They're running it again and see how it works. So you can that's just another example of how this clustering algorithm works. It does the E and the M repeated steps again and again. So again, well, in the next video, we'll look at how we analyze these clusters.